So we're ready for another Hot Rod High School hands-on lab. Today we're going to be talking about brake systems. Specifically, we're going to be designing and building the metal brake lines that allow the hydraulic fluid in a brake system to flow to all the different components. That being said, it's good to understand a little bit about the brake system before we go into just building stuff here. So we have over here the part that you guys are going to already be familiar with. That's our brake pedal. And our brake pedal is obviously going to be used for the driver to go through and actuate the brakes. The brakes are the most important safety system anywhere on the vehicle. So it's important that we make sure that all these components work correctly and work well together. Driver pushes down on the brake pedal and through a lever and then a rod. It's going to travel here through the brake booster. That rod's going to push forward into the master cylinder. The pistons in the master cylinder are then going to push forward and move fluid through the brake lines into the various wheel brakes. So we got two lines coming off the master cylinder here. On this particular system, we've got a diagonal split where with two pistons inside the master cylinder, we have one that's going to give brake fluid pressure to the left front and the right rear, and the other one is going to give brake fluid pressure to the right front and the left rear. We split these up with the two pistons so that if one of the pistons did fail, it would allow for the brake fluid to still go to 50% of the overall brakes. The rear brakes do about 30% of the braking, while the fronts are responsible for 70% of the braking. So we wouldn't want it to be split up forward and rear. In that way, if the front brake line were to go down, we'd end up losing 70% of our overall braking. Okay, our metal brake lines carry this pressurized brake fluid over to, in this case in the front, we have our disc brake calipers. In the rear, we have a set of brake drums. Some vehicles have four-wheel drums, that'd be like your older stuff, 1960s and older. And then most modern cars, you're only going to see disc brakes, both in the front and the rear. So it moves nicely, and then we push down the brake pedal, and that caliper clamps down around it. The action here is very much like just how the brake works on like a 10-speed bike. So that's how our system works. We have flexible rubber lines going to, on this case, the front. We actually got some small ones on the rear as well. And that's going to allow for the wheels to be able to turn left and right, as well as going up and down over bumps. We're going to focus on the steel. It's going to be a double wall steel tubing brake line here that's going to be carrying that fluid, and how to put the fittings onto it so that we can get this to go onto our rubber lines at one end and go onto our master cylinder over here at the other end. In your kit, you should have received this brake line flaring kit. Should have also come with a set of, we're going to be using copper brake line here. It's easier to work with. It's a lot easier when you're trying to start off and understand how all this works. I would not be using this on an actual vehicle. I'd want to go with the double wall steel tubing. If you go on to purchase double wall steel tubing, you'll see how much easier we've made it for you, giving you this stuff here. Inside your kit, you're going to find a clamp. You're going to find the anvil. You're going to find your cutter, and then the stamps. Also in the kit should come a bunch of these brake line ends, these line nuts that go on to our brake line. We don't need to use a huge section of this thing when we're going through and doing this job. So I'd say just to be easy on it, because you can use this a bunch of times over. This shouldn't be a project that you do one time and never look at again. Go ahead and pull yourself off a section. We'll go just a few inches long here. Go a little bit longer. And then what you do is you just tighten this little knob right here down around your brake line and spin it around. And then tighten it again and spin again. You're going to continue doing that back and forth until the brake line is going to cut. You're not going to want to cut this with like a hacksaw or a pair of pliers or anything like that. This is going to give you an absolutely perfect cut and a perfect working surface to be able to flare out the brake line so that the line nut holds onto it. So now that we have removed the brake line, it's time to set it up into our clamp here. This is a small size brake line at our 3/16 of an inch, so it's going to go into our smallest setting on our brake line here. Don't put it in backwards, so the side that doesn't have any writing on it, that's just flat like that, that doesn't work. We're going to be putting it in over on this side here. Get it in place, and get your wing nut here to slide in over it, and you're going to need a little bit sticking out. Just about that much right there. So if you, about half the thickness of the base of the little stamp right there. When I tighten this up in order to get the best clamp on it possible, I always tighten the side nearest to where the line is. Get it good and tight in there. And then the one that's further away. That just gives me a little extra leverage so it clamps on there nicely. Now, I can take my stamp, and once again the smallest size stamp, 3/16, go ahead and put that into your piece of line there. Now, I'll take my anvil here, open it up, slide it in and around the clamp, and now we'll just tighten this guy up right here. And we're going to just go tighten this all the way down until we've flattened it all the way against the end. Now, back it back off, and then get the stamp out of there. You might need to grab a pair of pliers to pull on this thing, which it looks like I do. Now that we got the stamp out of the way, take the anvil and one more time, this time with no stamp, nothing in the way. This shape on the end right here is absolutely perfect for us to finish up this flare job. So we call it a double flare because this is going to invert the end of the tube, flare it out a little bit better, and make for a much stronger overall product at the end. Now, if you flared it out too wide or had too much sticking out there, this process can actually split the end right there. And you need to end up with a perfect piece when you're all done. So now we can undo the clamp here and pull out our brake line, and we got exactly what we were looking for there for our brake line flare. Now, as far as what size flare nuts to use, this is just for practice purposes, so it doesn't really matter which one you choose. These are all for this 3/8 line size. But we got some of the bigger ones, some medium-sized ones, and a bunch of the little ones here. I'm just going to use 2 of the smaller sized ones. I'm going to take one of these the flare nuts here and put it over my brake line with the threads pointing outward. That's so I can then be able to thread it in to my brake line on one side, my master cylinder over on the other side. I'm going to take the other one and put it on there also with the threads facing outward. Now, to finish my brake line flare, go ahead and set this thing up just like we did before, just with the nuts already in place. I've seen a lot of people do this where they get the perfectly flared brake line, and it's not until after it's all done that they realize they never put the brake line nuts in, or they put them on but they were backward. Gotta have the threads facing outward on this. Oh, and we run into another little issue right here too. There is a little bit of this edge right here that is pushed out, and it's keeping me from putting this in. In this case, I'm going to be using a screwdriver and just clear away a little bit of that piece that had come out, gotten in my way. And there you go. Now, same thing that we did on the other side. Go ahead and press it in all the way down. Loosen it up. and then finish it up by putting on the double flare. So now we have a double flare brake line ready to be installed on the vehicle. Well, as long as I need a really short one. So now we have a master cylinder going off to a flexible brake line, off over to a brake caliper. So we can go through now, install this at the master cylinder at one end, and then thread into our brake line at the other end. The last thing to keep in mind is that these brake line nuts that we're dealing with here are pretty fragile. They're made out of very soft metal, and so we can't use an open end wrench for this because it could strip that material out. We can't use a box end wrench for it because there's no way to get it over the line, which is why they developed the brake line wrench. In this way we can slide the wrench over, and you see that it's much more enclosed than an open end wrench, but it does have that opening that allows it to go over a brake line. And now we can fit this over our brake line here. That concludes our brake line flare lab. Now we're heading on to the electrical unit. Bear with us because coming up soon we're going to be rebuilding some engines. We'll see you next time.